Valia by Leonid Andreiev. Valia was reading a huge, very huge book, almost half as large as himself, with very black letters and pictures occupying the entire page. To see the top line, Valia had to stretch out his neck, lean far over the table, kneeling in his chair and putting his short chubby finger on the letters, for fear they would be lost among the other ones like it, in which case it was a difficult task to find them again. Owing to these circumstances, unforeseen by the publishers, the reading advanced very slowly, notwithstanding the breath-catching interest of the book. It was a story about a very strong boy whose name was Prince Bova, and who could, by merely grasping the legs or arms of other boys, wrench them away from the body. But Valia was suddenly interrupted in his reading. His mother entered with some other woman. "Here he is," said his mother, her eyes red with weeping. The tears had evidently been shed very recently, as she was still crushing a white lace handkerchief in her hand. "Valichka, darling," exclaimed the other woman, and putting her arms about his head, she began to kiss his face and eyes, pressing her thin, hard lips to them. She did not fondle him, as did his mother, whose kisses were soft and melting. This one seemed loath to let go of him. Valia accepted her pricking caresses with a frown and silence. He was very much displeased at being interrupted, and he did not at all like this strange woman, tall, with bony, long fingers upon which there was not even one ring. And she smelled so bad, a damp, mouldy smell, while his mother always exhaled a fresh, exquisite perfume. At last the woman left him in peace, and while he was wiping his lips, she looked him over with that quick sort of glance which seemed to photograph one. His short nose, with its indication of a future little hump, his thick, unchildish brows over dark eyes, and the general appearance of stern seriousness, recalled someone to her, and she began to cry. Even her weeping was unlike Mamma's. The face remained immovable, while the tears quickly rolled down one after the other. Before one had time to fall, another was already chasing after it. Her tears ceased as suddenly as they had commenced, and she asked, "Valichka, do you know me?" "No." "I called to see you. Twice I called to see you." Perhaps she had called upon him. Perhaps she had called twice. But how should Valia know of it? With her questions, she only hindered him from reading. "I am your mamma, Valia," said the woman. Valia looked around in astonishment to find his mamma, but she was no longer in the room. "Why, can there be two mammas?" he asked. "What nonsense you are telling me." The woman laughed, but this laugh did not please Valia. It was evident that the woman did not wish to laugh at all, and did it purposely to fool him. For some moments they were both silent. "And what book is it you are reading?" "About Prince Bova," Valia informed her with serious self-esteem and an evident respect for the big book. "Ah, it must be very interesting. Tell me, please," the woman asked with an ingratiating smile. And once more something unnatural and false sounded in this voice, which tried to be soft and round like the voice of his mother, but remained sharp and prickly. The same insincerity appeared also in all the movements of the woman. She turned on her chair and even stretched out her neck with a manner as if preparing for a long and attentive listening. And when Valia reluctantly began the story, she immediately retired within herself like a dark lantern on which the cover is suddenly thrown. Valia felt the offence toward himself and Prince Bova, but wishing to be polite, he quickly finished the story and added, "That is all." "Well, goodbye, my dear, my dove," said the strange woman, and once more pressed her lips to Valia's face. "I shall soon call again. Will you be glad?" "Yes, come please," politely replied Valia, and to get rid of her more quickly he added, "I will be very glad." The visitor left him, but hardly had Valia found in the book again the word at which he had been interrupted, when Mamma entered, looked at him, and she also began to weep. He could easily understand why the other woman should have wept. She must have been sorry that she was so unpleasant and tiresome. But why should his mamma weep? Listen, mamma, he said musingly. How that woman bored me. She says that she is my mamma. Why, could there be two mammas to one boy? No, baby, there could not. But she speaks the truth. She is your mother. And what are you then? I am your auntie. This was a very unexpected discovery, but Valia received it with unshakable indifference. Auntie, well, let it be auntie. Was it not just the same? A word did not, as yet, have the same meaning for him as it would for a grown person. But his former mother did not understand it, and began to explain why it had so happened that she had been a mother and had become an aunt. Once, very long ago, when Valia was very, very little. How little? So? Valia raised his hand about a quarter of a yard from the table. Like Kiska, Valia exclaimed, joyfully surprised, with mouth half opened and brow lifted. He spoke of his white kitten that had been presented to him. Yes. Valia broke into a happy laugh, but immediately resumed his usual earnestness, and with the condescension of a grown person, recalling the mistakes of his youth, he remarked, How funny I must have been. When he was so very little and funny, like Kiska, he had been brought by that woman and given away forever, also like Kiska. And now, when he had become so big and clever, the woman wanted him. Do you wish to go to her? Asked his former mother, and reddened with joy when Valia resolutely and sternly said, No, she does not please me, and once more took up his book. Valia considered the affair closed, but he was mistaken. This strange woman, with a face as devoid of life as if all the blood had been drained out of it, who had appeared from no one knew where, and vanished without leaving a trace, seemed to have set the whole house in turmoil and filled it with a dull alarm. Mamma Auntie often cried, and repeatedly asked Valia if he wished to leave her. Uncle Papa grumbled, patted his bald pate so that the sparse grey hair on it stood up, and when Auntie Mamma was absent from the room, he also asked Valia if he would like to go to that woman. Once in the evening, when Valia was already in his little bed, but was not yet sleeping, he heard his uncle and auntie speaking of him and the woman. The uncle spoke in an angry basso, at which the crystal pendants of the chandelier gently trembled and sparkled with bluish and reddish lights. You speak nonsense, Nastasia Philipovna. We have no right to give the child away. She loves him, Grisha. And we, do we not love him? You are arguing very strangely, Nastasia Philipovna. It seems as if you would be glad to get rid of the child. Are you not ashamed of yourself? Well, well, how quick you are to take offense. Just consider this matter cold-bloodedly and reasonably. Some frivolous thing or other gives birth to children, light-heartedly disposes of them by placing them on your threshold, and afterwards says, Kindly give me my child, because on account of my lover having abandoned me, I feel lonesome. For theatres and concerts I have no money, so give me the child to serve as a toy to play with. No, madam, be easy. We shall see who wins in this case. You are unjust to her, Grisha. You know well how ill and lonely she is. You, Nastasia Philipovna, can make even a saint lose patience by God. And the child you seem to have forgotten? For you is it wholly immaterial whether he is brought up an honest man or a scoundrel, and I could bet my head that he would be brought up by her a scoundrel rascal and scoundrel. Grisha! I ask you for God's sake not to irritate me. And where did you get this devilish habit of contradicting? She is so lonely. And are we not lonely? The heartless woman that you are, Nastasia Philipovna. And why the devil did I marry you? The heartless woman broke into tears, and her husband immediately begged her pardon, declaring that only a born fool could pay any attention to the words of such an old ass as he was. Gradually she became calmer and asked, What does Talonsky say? And what makes you think that he is such a clever fellow? Gregory Aristarchovich again flew into a passion. He says that everything depends on how the court will look at it. Something new, is it not? As if we did not know, without his telling, that everything depends on how the court will look at it. Of course it matters little to him. What does he care? He will have his bark, and then safely go his way. If I had my way, it would go ill with all these empty talkers. But here, Nastasia Philipovna shut the dining room door, and Valia did not hear the end of the conversation. But he lay for a long time with open eyes, trying to understand what sort of woman it was who wished to take him away from his home and ruin him. On the next day, he waited from early morning, expecting his auntie to ask him if he wished to go to his mother. But auntie did not ask, neither did his uncle. Instead of this, they both gazed at Valia as if he were dangerously ill and would soon die. They caressed him and brought him large books with coloured pictures. The woman did not call any more, but it seemed to Valia that she must be lurking outside the door, watching for him, and that as soon as he would pass the threshold, she would seize him and carry him out into a black and dismal distance where cruel monsters were wriggling and breathing fire. In the evenings, while his uncle Gregory Aristarchovich was occupied in his study, and Nastasia Philipovna was knitting something, or playing a game of solitaire, Valia read his books, in which the lines would grow gradually thicker and the letters smaller. Everything in the room was quiet, so quiet that the only thing to be heard was the rustling of the pages he turned, and occasionally the uncle's loud cough from the study, or the striking of the abacus counters. The lamp with its blue shade threw a bright light on the blue plush table cover, but the corners of the room were full of a quiet, mysterious gloom. There stood large plants with curious leaves and roots crawling out upon the surface, and looking very much like fighting serpents, and it seemed as if something large and dark was moving amidst them. Valia read, and before his wide-open eyes passed terrible, beautiful, and sad images, which awakened in him pity and love, but more often fear. Valia was sorry for the poor water-nymph, who so dearly loved the handsome prince, that for him she had given up her sisters and the deep peaceful ocean. And the prince knew nothing of this love, because the poor water-nymph was dumb, and so he married a gay princess. And while great festivities in honour of the wedding were in full swing on board the ship, and music was playing, and all were enjoying themselves, the poor water-nymph threw herself into the dark waves to die. Poor, sweet little water-nymph, so quiet and sad and modest. But often terrible, cruel, human monsters appeared before Valia. In the dark nights they flew somewhere on their prickly wings, and the air whistled over their heads, and their eyes burned like red-hot coals. And afterward they were surrounded by other monsters like themselves, while a mysterious and terrible something was happening there. Laughter as sharp as a knife, long and pitiful wailing, strange weird dances in the purplish light of torches, their slanty fiery tongues wrapped in the red clouds of smoke, and dead men with long black beards. All this was the manifestation of a single enigmatic and cruel power, wishing to destroy man. Angry and mysterious spectres filled the air, hid among the plants, whispered something, and pointed their bony fingers at Valia. They gazed at him from behind the door of the adjoining unlit room, giggled, and waited till he would go to bed, when they would silently dart around over his head. They peeped at him from out of the garden through the large dark windows, and wailed sorrowfully with the wind. In and out among all this vicious and terrible throng appeared the image of that woman who had come for Valia. Many people came and went in the house of Gregory Aristarchovich, and Valia did not remember their faces, but this face lived in his memory. It was such an elongated, thin, yellow face, and smiled with a sly, dissembling smile, from which two deep lines appeared at the two corners of the mouth. If this woman took Valia, he would die. Listen, Valia once said to his aunt, tearing himself away from his book for a moment. Listen, he repeated with his usual earnestness, and with a glance that gazed straight into the eyes of the person with whom he spoke. I shall call you Mama, not Auntie. You talk nonsense when you say that the woman is Mama. You are Mama, not she. Why? Asked Nastasia Philipovna, blushing like a young girl who had just received a compliment. But along with her joy, there could also be heard in her voice the sound of fear for Valia. He had become so strange of late and timid, feared to sleep alone as he used to do, raved in his sleep and cried. But Velichka, it is true, she is your mother. I really wonder where you get this habit of contradicting, Valia said after some musing, imitating the tone of Grigory Aristarchovitch. Nastasia Philipovna laughed, but while preparing for bed that night, she spoke for a considerable time with her husband, who boomed like a Turkish drum, abused the empty talkers and frivolous, hair-brained women, and afterward went with his wife to see Valia. They gazed long and silently into the face of the sleeping child. The flame of the candle swayed in the trembling hand of Grigory Aristarchovitch and lent a fantastic, death-like colouring to the face of the boy, which was as white as the pillows on which it rested. It seemed as if a pair of stern, black eyes looked at them from the dark hollows, demanding a reply and threatening them with misfortune and unknown sorrow, and the lips twitched into a strange, ironic smile, as if upon his helpless child head lay a vague reflection of those cruel and mysterious spectre monsters that silently hovered over it. Valia, whispered the frightened Nastasia. The boy sighed deeply but did not move, as if enchained in the sleep of death. Valia, Valia, the deep trembling voice of her husband was added to that of Nastasia Philipovna. Valia opened his eyes, shaded by thick eyelashes. The light of the candle made him wink, and he sprang to his knees, pale and frightened. His uncovered, thin little arms, like a pearl necklace, encircled his auntie's full, rosy neck, and hiding his little head upon her breast, and screwing up his eyes tight, as if fearing that they would open of themselves, he whispered, I am afraid, Mamma, I am afraid. Do not go. That was a bad night for the whole household. When Valia at last fell asleep, Grigory Aristarchovitch got an attack of asthma. He choked, and his full white breast rose and fell spasmodically under the ice compresses. Toward morning he grew more tranquil, and the worn Nastasia fell asleep with the thought that her husband would not survive the loss of the child. After a family council, at which it was decided that Valia ought to read less and to see more of children of his own age, little girls and boys were brought to the house to play with him. But Valia from the first conceived a dislike for these foolish children, who, in his eyes, were too noisy, loud, and indecorous. They pulled flowers, tore books, jumped over chairs, and fought like little monkeys, and he, serious and thoughtful, looked on at their pranks with amazement and displeasure, and going up to Nastasia Philipovna, said, They tire me. I would rather sit by you. And in the evenings, he once more took up his book, and when Grigory Aristarchovitch, grumbling at all the deviltry the child read about, and by which he was losing his senses, gently tried to take the book from Valia's hands, the child silently and irresolutely pressed it to himself. And the improvised pedagogue beat a confused retreat, and angrily scolded his wife. Is this what you call bringing up? No, Nastasia Philipovna, I see you are more fit to take care of kittens than to bring up children. The boy is so spoiled that one cannot even take a book away from him. One morning, while Valia was sitting at breakfast with Nastasia Philipovna, Grigory Aristarchovitch suddenly came rushing into the dining room. His hat was tilted on the back of his head. His face was covered with perspiration. While still at the other side of the door, he shouted joyfully into the room, "Refused! The court has refused!" The diamond earrings in Nastasia Philippovna's ears began to sparkle, and the little knife she held in her hand dropped to the plate with a clatter. "Is it true?" she asked breathlessly. Grigory Aristarchovich made a serious face, just to show that he had spoken the truth. But immediately forgetting his intention, his face became covered with a whole network of merry wrinkles. Then once more, remembering that he lacked that earnestness of demeanor with which important news is usually imparted, he frowned, pushed a chair up to the table, placed his hat upon it, forgot that it was his hat, and thinking the chair to be already occupied by someone, threw a stern look at Nastasia Philippovna, then on Valia, winked his eye at Valia, and only after all these solemn preliminaries did he declare, "I always said that Talonsky was a devilish clever fellow. Can't fool him easily, Nastasia Philippovna." "So it is true?" "You are always ready with your eternal doubts. I said the case of Madame Akimova is dismissed. Clever, is it not, little brother?" He turned to Valia and added in a stern official tone, "And that said, Akimova is to pay the costs." "That woman will not take me then?" "I guess she won't, brother mine. Ach, I have entirely forgotten. I brought you some books." Grigory Aristarchovich rushed into the corridor, but halted on hearing Nastasia Philippovna's scream. Valia had fallen back on his chair in a faint. A happy time began for the family. It was as if someone who had lain dangerously ill in the house had suddenly recovered, and all began to breathe more easily and freely. Valia lost his fear of the terrible monsters and no longer suffered from nightmares. When the little monkeys, as he called the children, came to see him again, he was the most inventive of the lot. But even into the most fantastic plays, he introduced his habitual earnestness and staidness, and when they played Indians, he found it indispensable to divest himself of almost all his clothing and cover his body with red paint. In view of the business-like manner in which these games were conducted, Grigory Aristarchovich now found it possible to participate in them as far as his abilities allowed. In the role of a bear, he did not appear to great advantage, but he had a great and well-deserved success in his role of elephant. And when Valia, silent and earnest as a true son of the goddess Kali, sat upon his father's shoulders and gently tapped upon his rosy bald pate with a tiny toy hammer, he really reminded one of a little Eastern prince who despotically reigns over people and animals. The lawyer Talonsky tried to convey a hint to Grigory Aristarchovich that all was not safe yet, but the former could not comprehend how 3 judges could reverse the decision of 3 other judges when the laws are the same here and everywhere. And when the lawyer insisted, Grigory Aristarchovich grew angry, and to prove that there was nothing to be feared from the higher court, he brought forward that same Talonsky on whom he now implicitly relied. "Why, are you not going to be present when the case is brought before the court?" "Well, then, what is there to be talked about? I wish you, Nastasia Philippovna, would make him ashamed of himself." Talonsky smiled, and Nastasia Philippovna gently chided him for his purposeless doubts. They also spoke of the woman who had caused all the trouble, but now that she could menace them no more, and the court had decided that she must bear all the costs of the trial, they often dubbed her "poor woman." Since the day Valia had heard that the woman had no longer any power to take him, she had lost in his eyes the halo of mysterious fear, which enveloped her like a mist and distorted the features of her thin face, and Valia began to think of her as he did of all other people. He now repeatedly heard that she was unhappy and could not understand why, but this pale, bloodless face grew more simple, natural, and near to him. The poor woman, as they called her, began to interest him, and recalling other poor women of whom he had read, he felt a growing pity and a timid tenderness for her. He imagined that she must sit alone in some dark room, fearing something and weeping, always weeping, as she had wept then when she had come to see him, and he felt sorry that he had not told her the story of Prince Bova better than he had at the time. It appeared that 3 judges could, after all, disagree with the decision of 3 other judges. The higher court had reversed the decision of the district court. The child was adjudged to his real mother, and the appeal was not considered by the Senate. When the woman came to take Valia away with her, Gregory Aristarchovich was not at home. He was at Talonsky's house and was lying in Talonsky's bedroom, and only the bald, rosy Pate was visible above the sea of snow-white pillows. Nastasia Philipovna did not leave her room, and the maid led Valia forth from it, already dressed for the road. He wore a fur coat and tall overshoes in which he moved his feet with difficulty. From under his fur cap looked out a pale little face with a frank and serious expression in the dark eyes. Under his arm, Valia carried a book in which was the story of a poor water nymph. The tall, gaunt woman pressed the boy to her shabby coat and sobbed out, "How you have grown, Valichka! You are unrecognizable," she said, trying to joke. But Valia adjusted his cap, and contrary to habit, did not look into the eyes of the one who from this day on was to be his mother, but into her mouth. It was large, but with beautiful small teeth. The 2 wrinkles on the corners of the mouth were still on the same place where Valia had seen them first, only now they were deeper. "You are not angry with me?" asked Mamma, but Valia, not replying to her question, said, "Let us be gone." "Valichka!" came a pitiful scream from Nastasia Philipovna's room, and she appeared on the threshold with eyes swollen from weeping, and clasping her hands, she rushed toward the child, sank on her knees, and put her head on his shoulder. She did not utter a sound, only the diamonds in her ears trembled. "Come, Valia," sternly said the tall woman, taking his hand. "We must not remain any longer among people who have subjected your mother to such torture, such torture." Her dry voice was full of hatred, and she longed to strike the kneeling woman with her foot. "Ugh, heartless wretches! You would be glad to take even my only child from me," she wrathfully whispered, and pulled Valia away by his hand. "Come, don't be like your father who abandoned me." "Takakari of him," Nastasia called after them. The hired sleigh, which stood waiting for them, flew softly and lightly over the snow, and noiselessly carried Valia away from the quiet house with its wonderful plants and flowers, its mysterious fairy tale world, immeasurable and deep as the sea, with its windows gently screened by the boughs of the tall trees of the garden. Soon the house was lost in the mass of other houses, as similar to each other as the letters in Valia's book, and vanished forever from Valia. It seemed to him as if they were swimming in a river, the banks of which were constituted of rows of lanterns as close to each other as beads on a string. But when they approached nearer, the beads were scattered, forming large, dark spaces and merging behind into just such a line of light. And then Valia thought that they were standing motionless on the very same spot, and everything began to be like a fairy tale. He himself and the tall woman who was pressing him to her with her bony hand, and everything around him. The hand in which he carried his book was getting stiff with cold, but he would not ask his mother to take the book from him. The small room into which Valia's mother had taken him was untidy and hot. In a corner near the large bed stood a little curtained bed, such as Valia had not slept in for a long, long time. "You are frozen. Well, wait. We shall soon have some tea. Well, now you are with your mamma. Are you glad?" his mother asked, with the hard, unpleasant look of one who has been forced to smile beneath blows all her life long. "No," Valia replied shyly, frightened at his own frankness. "No? And I had bought some toys for you. Just look, there they are on the window." Valia approached the window and examined the toys. They were wretched paper horses, with straight, thick legs, Punch with a red cap on, with an idiotically grinning face and a large nose, and little tin soldiers with one foot raised in the air. Valia had long ago given up playing with toys and did not like them, but from politeness he did not show it to his mother. "Yes, they are nice toys," he said. She noticed the glance he threw at the window, and said with that unpleasant, ingratiating smile, "I did not know what you liked, darling, and I bought them for you a long time ago." Valia was silent, not knowing what to reply. "You must know that I am all alone, Valia, all alone in the wide world. I have no one whose advice I could ask. I thought they would please you." Valia was silent. Suddenly the muscles of the woman's face relaxed, and the tears began to drop from her eyes, quickly, quickly, one after the other, and she threw herself on the bed, which gave a pitiful squeak under the weight of her body, and with one hand pressed to her breast, the other to her temples, she looked vacantly through the wall with her pale, faded eyes, and whispered, "He was not pleased, not pleased." Valia promptly approached the bed, put his little hand, still red with the cold, on the large head of his mother, and spoke with the same serious staidness which distinguished this boy's speech. "Do not cry, Mamma. I will love you very much. I do not care to play with toys, but I will love you ever so much. If you wish, I will read to you the story of the poor water nymph."